Welcome to another OU Insider Under the Visor Sooners podcast. My name is Brandon Drum. I'm here with Parker Thune and a special guest. When special things happen, you got to bring in special guests. And Damonic Williams, TCU transfer, one of the top transfer defensive tackles that have hit the portal, period. Since the portal's opened, I can't remember outside of Walter Nolan, there may be a few more that have been as ballyhooed as him hitting the portal. And Oklahoma last night, we're recording this on a Friday morning, on a Thursday evening, solidified their defensive line for the 2024, particularly the interior defensive line, by signing Damonic Williams, and former OU superstar, former Chicago Bear, ESPN announcer, play-by-play commentary, color commentary, Dusty Dvoracek is on with us. And you also are on SiriusXM radio every morning with one Danny Cannell. So this guy has he's many hats is what he is. And he's also the father of one Hudson Dvoracek, who is a superstar up and coming wide receiver. So, I mean, many hats of Dusty Dvoracek. Appreciate you joining us. But before we get into all that, Parker, take us away with our ads.
Yeah, let's get these bills paid, and then we can jump into ball for quite a while here. But this episode of the OU Insider Under the Visor podcast, folks, is brought to you by Mando. And guys, you ever lift a little too hard or just forget to apply your daily deodorant and get hit by a truckload of BO from all directions? Or does that 3-in-1 shampoo leave you needing a second shower just a few hours after the first? I'd hope none of our guys out there listening are still using 3-in-1 shampoo. Come on, it's 2024. But regardless, from the founders of Lumi, Mando Whole Body Deodorant is helping men conquer their odor in a new way. Formulated with mandelic acid, Mando has long-lasting 72-hour odor control that actually stops odor before it starts. The best part is you can put Mando everywhere. To top it off, Mando's cologne quality scents were created with men in mind. Pro tip, try their best-selling scent, Bourbon Leather. It's a game changer. You can get it across a variety of Mando products. We own many of the products in the Mando lineup, and they are money, especially that Bourbon Leather body wash in particular. I've got it in a travel size whenever I'm out on the road covering OU football or on the recruiting trail. It goes with me. And we got a special offer for you. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code and link. You can use code INSIDER at shopmando.com. Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. Luckily, once again, we have a discount code to help you get hooked on your favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code that equates to over 40% off your starter pack when you use code INSIDER at shopmando.com, shopmando.com. And with that out of the way, fellas, Damonic Williams is a Sooner. And Brandon, we both had our doubts throughout the process because this is really the first of this type of portal recruitment that Oklahoma has emerged victorious in the portal era. But it's a watershed one, and it's a significant one because, as we discussed in the instant reaction video, this helps immediately solidify Oklahoma's defense as they head into the SEC in 2024. It was already going to be good. That interior defensive line is maybe the one position group you could look at and say, okay, they're not quite as deep enough, not quite as talented enough. There's talent and there's depth there, but Damonic Williams is what puts that position group over the top. No question about it. You're on mute there, Brandon.
I muted myself while you were doing the ad, and I just didn't even think about it. So, Dusty, I just want to get your thoughts real quick. First and foremost, when you watched him, you covered how many of his games last year?
I did one TCU game last year. I think I did 2 the year before. So I've called 3 of his games. I mean, dude is a baller. I'm just going to pick up from right there. Like, this is big on so many levels for Oklahoma. I think one, let's talk about on the field. He's an anchor. Okay. He's 6'2", he's 320 plus. You can't move him. Inside zone is one of the number one runs in all of college football. He is sturdy in the middle. And I just think that he really solidifies the interior of this defensive line for Oklahoma. A lot of young talent. I love Jaden Jackson. I think David Stone's ceiling is massive, but you don't want to walk into the SEC having to rely upon that. And now you've got legitimate starting power. You've got legitimate depth along that front. And let's just be honest, man, at championships, you can look at defensive lines and primarily defensive tackle, and there's a direct trace to teams that are winning at the top of college football and their defensive tackle play. It is, as Rick Neuheisel, who comes on after me on SiriusXM College Sports Radio, he says all the time, the interior of a defensive line is gold bullion. Everybody wants it and few have it. And Oklahoma, for the first time in what I would say a long time, they've got legitimate star power at the front, and they've got legitimate depth there behind it. So I can't say enough how much on the field this matters. And again, I think of sturdy, I think of anchor. He's got heavy hands. He gets off blocks very well. And what I think he's going to do as much as anything, he's going to create a mess in the middle of that defensive line and on offensive lines for opposing units when they try to run the football inside. That's going to clear things up for Danny Stutzman. That's going to clear things up for the entire defensive line or the entire linebacking core for Oklahoma. And I love it. And I think with Todd Bates able to work with him, who's one of the best developers of defensive tackle talent in all of college football, I think it's just an absolute home run. The other aspect of this is the first time, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it, this is the first time Oklahoma has stepped up and said, we're a player. All right. We're not going to be pushed around by SEC money, by SEC people. We're here and we came to play. And so I think that just from a statement standpoint, it's a huge win on the field. And to me, it's a huge win off the field as well, to say that we're not going to allow Texas, LSU, Missouri, whoever it may be, just to step in and outbid us. We're going to step up to the plate, and we're going to go toe-to-toe with anybody that wants to step up. And I think on so many levels, this is a massive statement and a massive win for the Oklahoma Sooners being able to get Damonic Williams to come to OU.
And to your point there, Dusty, I mentioned it in a tweet last night, but this is a thing that's been happening behind the scenes. Other programs in their recruiting pitches to other schools regarding Oklahoma have been telling those prospects, hey, OU can't or won't pay you. You're not going to get money if you go to Oklahoma. Well, it's really, really hard to continue to justify that claim given what happened in this particular instance with Damonic Williams. Because, I mean, you look at the list of schools that Oklahoma beat out for Williams, LSU, Missouri, Texas, especially in this new era of college football. Those are three pretty formidable opponents. Now, I'd be curious to hear your answer to this question. I was on the radio yesterday afternoon with Teddy Lehman, and we were kind of kicking around this topic or this question. It was posed to us by a listener. The question was, Damonic Williams, should he commit to Oklahoma, which we know now he did, he becomes Oklahoma's most formidable defensive tackle since who? I think Teddy's answer was Jordan Phillips, which was darn near a decade ago. What would your answer to that question be?
Yeah, I think Jordan Phillips, Jordan was like sneaky good, like it's almost like you knew he was a really talented player. I would argue he's been better as a pro than he even was at Oklahoma. So, I would say Jordan Phillips, that would have been my answer. But I mean, really, I think the expectation is since Gerald McCoy, and they're totally different players. I don't in any way want to try to compare Damonic Williams to Gerald McCoy, but the impact that he potentially has on a defensive line, I think you're hopeful that he brings that. Jordan was a really good player, but I never thought, and this is no disrespect at all, Jordan's had a phenomenal NFL career. Because I was doing the OU sidelines with Teddy at the time, whenever Jordan was a player, I never remember going like, he was a guy that defensive or offensive coordinators had to scheme around. I think Damonic Williams, the guy you look at on tape and you go, when you watch the tape, you go, we got a problem. Like we have a problem right now. And when that problem starts right there in the middle, it creates a situation that you have to scheme around this player. So I would honestly say I would go back to Gerald McCoy, Adrian Taylor prior to the injury that he had in the Sun Bowl. I mean, those two guys were menaces together. And then obviously Adrian, I don't think he ever really returned to the same player that he was prior to the injury, but we all know what GK was and continue to go on to be with Tampa Bay. So again, not comparing Damonic Williams to Gerald McCoy, but I think that you have to look bigger than Jordan Phillips. Jordan Phillips is a good college player, probably better pro than college player. But I think that with the expectation, what it should be for what you've given to go get Damonic Williams, I think it should be an impact that resembles one that we saw with Gerald McCoy all the way back in 2008, 2009 for the Oklahoma Sooners defensive line.
So I guess I have to ask this because he kind of gets overlooked only because I think he underperformed quite a bit. But talent-wise, people always kind of overlook. I agree with you because Parker, we had the same discussion the other day, and I said Jordan Phillips.
Yeah.
But even I overlooked Perion Winfrey and his talent when he was there. It's just, I think the scheme, and I think the fact that he just never really, he was the number one player. Everybody wanted him in junior college. Alabama, he chose Oklahoma over everybody. I mean, he legitimately was getting recruited by Alabama and Nick Saban and all those. They wanted him very badly, but he never just became who he was supposed to be. So I think we automatically jump a decade past him because of that. Charles Tapper was more of an edge guy. And so Charles Walker was also an up and down guy, but he also had very similar talent to Perion Winfrey. They've had guys. It's always just been underperformance. And that's what you worry about, right? At Oklahoma, like at some point that culture barrier has got to be broken over the last decade to where the D-line's got to perform. And ironically, the last guy to do that was Mike Stoops' defense in 2014, right? So I guess I ask you, how close are they to being back to that point where you can legitimately look to that defensive front and say, there's nothing to worry about?
They're close, man. And they may be there. We'll see with the edge. I think it's a huge year for R. Mason Thomas. I think if R. Mason can make that step, like I see the twitch, the first step, like to me, he's the most elite edge rusher on this team. I liked what I saw from Woolard, the Miami of Ohio transfer, sturdy, good quality. I think that, Ford can be a nice piece. Obviously, I love Ethan Downs. I love what he's about. I love his motor. But like when you get into third down and everyone knows it's a pass, who can win? Like when you know where I'm going, they know where you're going. Everyone knows, okay, it's 3rd and 7 and it's pass pro. Who can just win? And that's where like the elite defensive lines have those guys that can just win. If R. Mason Thomas, who I've seen it, I know it's in there. If he can be consistently that guy, this defensive line, I think, is there. Because I think in the middle, defensive tackle wise, I love what they're bringing to the table. You've got veteran presence now with Lowell and with Williams. You've got Dejon Terry, who is just heavy-handed, big, physical, run stopper. And you got this young, talented guys in Jaden Jackson, who I think is going to be an absolute just a dog on the middle of that defensive line. And David Stone, who the sky's the limit. I mean, I came in with Tommy Harris. I know, obviously we all know Gerald McCoy very well. He's that type of talent with the length that he has, getting to an edge, being able to rush the passer. So and now what it looked like a month ago is that those guys would be relied upon. Like you had to have them step up. Now it's a luxury if they step up. So the depth is there inside. And I like the overall numbers that we have. I think PJ Adebawara, I think he's another guy that, like, if he can just make a step between him and R. Mason Thomas, if they can develop, and between the summer and into fall camp, they can take that one more step and be legit dominant edge guys that not even on first and second down, but third down, second long situations when you got to be able to get to the queue. And I don't even care about sacks, pressures, getting quarterbacks off their spot, getting them uncomfortable, creating havoc in the backfield, just being a problem for opposing offensive tackles. If they can be those guys, this defensive line is where they need to be. And I don't have to tell you guys, the linebacking core is as deep as it's been in years. The safety room is as good a safety room since I played. And that includes guys like Brandon Everidge, Brodney Poole, play with Roy Williams. They're starting. Brandon Hall has done an amazing job with that safety room. The corners, I like the starters, and I think that they've got some nice depth coming up as well. Like, the back two levels are freaking awesome. And the question really was, can this defensive line get to that point already with these acquisitions they've made? And if you get that development from those pieces, to me, R. Mason Thomas is the key. And I don't want to put too much pressure on the young man, but if he can be that guy, that elite edge rusher, this Oklahoma defense, it's going to be humming. And it's going to be a real problem for opposing offenses first year in the SEC.
I think this is a really cool opportunity to get an authoritative answer on this question, Dusty, because I think with your background and your platform, nobody can really justifiably accuse you of not knowing ball. And so there were a couple fellas last night with a platform in a different market that were running down the list. Well, not really running down the list, but they were discussing Oklahoma's top end talent on the defensive side of the ball. And the comment that one of them made was, well, they just don't seem to have the monsters like they used to in years past. They don't have the elite, the scary dudes on the defensive side of the ball. How many, if we're just talking about elite football players on the defensive side of the ball right now for Oklahoma heading into 2024, how many of those dudes do you see when you look at that starting 11?
Well, Danny Stutzman's elite. I mean, he's arguably the best linebacker coming back in the country. I mean, there's a debate to be had. I think there's several other guys. You look at Barrett Carter at Clemson. I think Deontay Lawson at Alabama. But Danny Stutzman's right there with just about anybody. Billy Bowman, to me, he's as premier a safety as there is coming back in college football. Elite. I mean,
why doesn't he get love? Then I don't understand that. No, he's not on any lists.
Who cares? Like, you know what? Lists. I don't.
I know, but it's crazy.
Lists don't matter. Just go watch the tape. Billy Bowman is elite. Peyton Bowen is an elite football player. The ball skills, the savvy, how smooth he is. I mean, it's next level type of stuff. And it's going to be interesting. I'm not going to say they're elite yet, but Kip Lewis. He is a big time football player. Lewis Carter is a big time football player. I'm sure you guys have talked a lot about it, but Kobe McKenzie and what he's been able to do. I mean, like, they've got legitimate depth there. I mean, elite, top end, upper echelon players. I mean, like, if I was making out my preseason All-American list, I think Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman are on that list. I mean, if you got two preseason All-Americans, that's a heck of a starting point. And you've got a lot of talent around that and depth to build around it. So Parker, I can't speak to what anybody said. I try to stay off social media as much as I possibly can. I don't know
Good move.
what the talking heads were saying, but I can just tell you, having played, 20 years ago now, having played for some pretty good defenses at Oklahoma, and really started covering this team in 2010 when I got into media. 2011, I guess, is when Teddy and I kind of first started on the sidelines. This is the best collection of talent defensively I've seen at Oklahoma in probably the last 13 years. You probably have to go back to before 2010, since I can remember this many quality players on the defensive side. So I don't know if that speaks to each individual of eliteness. But I think that you've got a lot of, upper tier players in key spots. Dominic Williams to me is he's a top probably 8 to 10 defensive tackle in college football with a chance to be even better than that. I think Oklahoma wants and needs him to be even better than that, but I don't want to hype him up too much, but he's got the capability of being one of the best defensive tackles. When you can make the argument that you've got one of the best players at all three levels of a defense, what more would any talking head who covers college football want? Because we all know that the distribution of talent is more vast in college football now than it's ever been. And for Oklahoma to now feel really good about all three levels of their defense, and the great thing is it's just getting started, because Coach V and his staff have just done, I don't have to tell you guys, you're recruiting guys, you know it better than I do. So I'm preaching to the choir, but Oklahoma has recruited well, but they haven't recruited great on the defensive side. They've been recruiting great defensively since this staff came into place. And I think that this year we're really going to see the fruits of that labor on the recruiting trail. And when you sprinkle in a Dominic Williams, I think it just makes everything pop. And at least I'm hopeful, and I believe it, that we're going to get a chance to see a defense that resembles the one that Brent Venables was leading at Clemson and one he was leading at Oklahoma before he made his departure to the ACC.
So you started covering sidelines in 2011, and I want to kind of talk about the departure part here in just a minute. But before I do that, you've brought up the recruiting, and you talked about how well they've recruited on the defensive side of the ball. There's a particular player that you and I have discussed, Jacoby Johnson at corner.
Linked, athletic. I mean, crazy athleticism. Dude can jump out of the gym. I mean, it just, what is he, 6'2", 205-ish?
Yeah.
I mean, and I just think he's still raw, but he is a big-time talent that I can tell you this staff really likes a lot.
Okay, so on that note, so that kind of solidifies kind of where you're talking about that back end, how well they've recruited. They've got other Jacoby Johnsons back there as well, like Makari Vickers. They even got Des Malone from San Diego State that's had one touchdown thrown on him.
Like his link too, man. Like Kanai Walker, by the way, 6'2", 205 don't grow on trees at corner. And like even Des Malone, I mean, I think he's 6 foot, around 200 pounds, but just the length. And that's one thing that, sorry to cut you off, Brandon, and let you get to your question, but like, that's one thing I can tell you that they're looking for. They're identifying length outside on the perimeter, because you got to have it.
Yeah. So my question is there's no Dakota Austins out there, and that's not a knock on Dakota Austin. He was just a 5'8", 160-pound corner back in the day. But you witnessed the 2011 Brent Venables defense. And everybody kind of forgets how good that defense was because of the Baylor game. And everybody kind of that game was magnified because it essentially won Robert Griffin III's his Heisman, right? When all that went down, how upsetting was it with kind of the other guys, the alma mater, the grads? Yeah, the players, like how upsetting was it to hear the fan base was like literally coming down on BV, and it never was the same after he left. That's not a knock on Mike Stoops. That's not a knock on, I guess it is a knock on Alex Grinch, but I'll say it. But it just never was the same after he left, and OU fans instantly regretted it. But how upsetting was it to the former players?
So, I mean, there's a lot in that question.
Yeah.
Mike Stoops recruited me. So first and foremost, I mean, that's my.
Oh, you were happy about him, obviously. Yes.
That's my guy.
Yeah.
And Coach Venables sat at my mom's dinner table on my official visit at home, made chicken spaghetti when Bob Stoops and him rolled up in a Jaguar back in December of 2000 after they put themselves in position for a national championship. So, like, I mean, those guys are family to me. So, it's hard for me to be overly critical in either way. One thing I'll say about, 2011 and kind of that era, the offenses in the Big 12 were crazy good. I don't think people, and I'm not trying to make excuses for the defense, but I don't think people recognize or realize, exactly what defenses in the Big 12 were dealing with at that time. And it's funny because now we see it all over the place. I mean, you see Jeff Lebby running it. You're going to see an iteration of Oklahoma running it. You're going to see Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss running it. But the Baylor offense was brand new at that time. Like, and when you had a guy like RG3 who was just incredible running that offense, I don't know if we give enough credit to just how difficult some of those offenses were to defend. And at the time, I mean, even Missouri with Chase Daniels and even Kansas at that time, like, and you look around the Big 12, like, it was really tough to play defense in the Big 12. And the standard to that point at Oklahoma was like top 5, top 10 defenses. Like, my 4 years at Oklahoma, we were top 5 defense every year. Like, that's who we were. That was the standard. And I do think that, and I don't know, I have no clue how much of the noise these coaches actually hear and listen to, especially back then. The noise wasn't as magnified in 2011 as it is today with social media.
Twitter was brand new. Yep.
But, I think that Coach V, there was this standard and Oklahoma slipped a little bit. Like, they dipped. And part of that was there's a little dip, and part of that was there's these great offenses that people were trying to figure out how to defend them. Like, what is this? Like, what is this? Spreading the field 53 1/3 yards and this up tempo and like, oh my God, like, holy cow, this is really tough to defend. And I think that, Coach V, as much as anything, I thought he got a bad shake from the fan base. And to his credit, then obviously it was kind of a perfect storm. Coach Stoops gets let go of Arizona. It opened up an opportunity. I think Coach V made as hard and as good a decision as he could have made. Because to that point, he played for Bob Stoops. He coached with Mike Stoops. He had this circle, right? And he didn't really have anything outside of that circle. And when he made this choice to join Dabo Swinney and Clemson football, it was, I can just tell you from my standpoint, it hurt. Like, I did not want to see, because I know how good he is. Like, I don't care. I don't care about what anyone thinks, or I played for the man. I know what he's about. I know how passionate he is. I know how smart he is. Football smart. The dude is a savant. It's amazing how much defense he knows and answers he has to whatever an offense is going to throw at him. So I hated to see him go, but I also at the same time love seeing what he was able to do at Clemson. And I think that him leaving, going to work for Dabo, getting a chance to stretch his legs, go out on his own, I think he grew as a person. I think he grew as a coach. And I think that you don't get what you have today as the head coach and the leader of this program if he wouldn't have made that move. So, all things happen for a reason, as they say. And I would say similar to Josh Heupel. Like, Josh is a very good friend of mine. It was a nasty and ugly end to his tenure at Oklahoma. But I don't think Josh is the coach he is today without having gone through that. To go to Utah State, then to go to Missouri as an offensive coordinator, to grow, to learn more, to do different things. And now he's doing just a phenomenal job in Knoxville, very similar to what I believe Coach Venables is going to do here at Oklahoma. So, coaching journeys are fascinating. They're interesting. And especially at a place like Oklahoma, where the expectation and the standard, rightfully so, is so unbelievably high. If you don't meet and hit that expectation, fans will let you hear about it. And I'm not here to say don't do that. And that's fair. That's fine. That's what makes Oklahoma one of these special college football programs in the entire country. But I would just say that looking back at 2011, to answer your question, I don't think that Coach V got the right shake, but at the exact same time, it's probably exactly what he needed, because he's probably not the coach he is today without having gone through that, having made the choice to go to Clemson. And I think that he's grown philosophically as a defensive mind as well as an overall head coach.
So real quickly on that, dude, you know the whole story, but a lot of people don't know that he got to the airport, and before he signed any papers or anything like that, Clemson, he had verbally agreed he was flying out there to sign everything, because back then that's what you had to do. It still was kind of archaic a little bit, but he calls Bob Stoops crying, saying, "I can't do this. I'm coming back." And Bob, to his credit, goes, "You need to do this for you, for nobody else but you." So I'm with you on that, but I've always wanted to ask you that every time we've talked. Just because that was such a watershed moment for BV professionally and career wise. And it's just kind of funny to think about how close it was from not happening. If you don't know that story, it almost even didn't happen even after he agreed. He almost hopped back in the car, grabbed his luggage, and went back to Norman and just set up shop to be the co-DC again and run it back again with Mike. And it's actually worked out great for OU in the end. And there's a lot of people that thought BV was upset and that how could he come back and all that, when the reality is he was at peace with it because of what Bob did to say, this is for you more than it is anybody else.
You know,
And
Coach Stoops had that moment going to Florida, you know, and
that's interesting.
and,
Yeah, that's right.
and I think that if, you know, I'm very close to Coach, and we've had a lot of discussions, and it's not like he's shy about it, but I think Steve Spurrier changed the trajectory of who he was as a coach. As much impact as, you know, Hayden Fry as his coach at Iowa, or obviously Bill Snyder there at Kansas State, had such a huge impact on his coaching career. Steve Spurrier had a different way of thinking, right? He had a different philosophy. And I do think it's important, especially for head coaches, to get different looks, different views out of a different lens, and be able to figure out who they are. I'm gonna grab some of this, I'm gonna grab some of that, and I'm gonna insert who I am. And I think that was unbelievably beneficial for Coach Stoops. And I would have to think, you know, during that entire process, he recognized that, he saw that, and it was a huge plus for Coach Venables when he was able to go and work with Dabo and see things out of a different lens and do things a little bit of a different way. Get out of your comfort zone. I mean, he played for Bob Stoops. He coached under Bob Stoops and Mike Stoops, and that's all he knew. And so I think that anytime you can get out of that lens, you know, a good example is Zach Alley. You know, Zach Alley, 7 years he spent with Brent Venables, a freaking carbon copy of Coach V as his GA. I mean, they got the same mannerisms. They speak the same language. They do everything. But you know what? At some point, Zach Alley had to go do it on his own. And he left, and he got a couple of jobs. He did an amazing job at Jacksonville State. And that ability to leave and go on your own and find your own path, figure out who you are, is so unbelievably paramount and beneficial to the growth of any coach. And I just think that, you know, again, at the time I was angry, I was upset, I didn't love it. But looking back in retrospect, it's the best thing that could ever happen to Coach Venables. And I think that, you know, if you pinned him down and you really pressed him, he would admit that, like, that adversity in his career. And it's funny, like, I don't even know what the defense is ranked that year. It's probably in the 40s, which felt like it was 140.
Was like 32.
Right. 32 felt like it was 120, right? Because just the standard was so high. But going through that adversity and learning and shaping yourself and changing and going elsewhere, it's helped make him into the coach that he is now. And I think it's awesome, because the Coach Venables that I played for, there's a lot that's the same, but there's so much that's different. That scheme, and that's also just the man that you speak to and hear from every day.
Now,
So the 2020, they had 28. I think that was the closest they got to 2011 was that in 2015 were the two closest they got to 2011. Could you imagine firing or having a coach move on with a 38 ranked defense now, do you? All right, Parker, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, Dusty, I was going to ask because you brought up Zach Alley. And, I think in a program like Oklahoma, every single offseason, given the age in which we're in, you would expect that a program like OU makes some pretty significant portal additions, i.e. Caden Wooler, Des Malone, the pieces that they added on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But if we're keeping things exclusive to this defense, I think few would argue that the two most impactful additions defensively for Oklahoma this offseason are, and not necessarily in this order, the acquisition of Zach Alley as co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach, and then obviously yesterday's addition of Damonic Williams. With those two guys now on board at Oklahoma, how much have their additions shifted your perspective of what Oklahoma is defensively and what they can be in 2024?
I've been blown away seeing it from the inside and talking with people at the impact Zach Alley's had. I got to be honest. When he was first hired, I didn't think a whole lot of it. I thought this is good. He speaks the same language as Coach V. He has the same mannerisms as Coach V, but it's still going to be, Coach V doing everything. What I've been blown away by is the trust and how much Coach Venables has delegated to Zach Alley. And it's because of the things I talked about. And we'll see come the season next year when the rubber meets the road and when you're in the fire, how much that continues. But I think it's important for Coach Venables to delegate, to be able to be the CEO. I mean, to be a head coach in college football now, man, you guys know, man, there's so much to it. You are tugged and pulled in more directions now than ever before. And I think that and even game day operations, like to be able to sit back and be able to have a full picture of what's going on, not just a hyper-focused defensive side, offensive side, but a full picture of the entirety of a team on game day is so important. And the trust that Coach Venables has in Zach Alley and the ability for him to really coach. And, I've talked to a lot of players. I talked to a lot of coaches here this spring. And one thing that was amazing to me was, and I love Ted Roof. I think Ted Roof is an awesome guy. I think he's a really good football coach. But the reality is, Coach Roof, he's done things a certain way for a long time. And Coach Venables and him were together for a very brief time before coming to Oklahoma. And so I still think there was a lot of behind the scenes. This is not what was told to me. This is my opinion. But I think there was a lot of, Coach Venables having to tell Coach Roof what he wanted, how he wanted it, and then correct it if it wasn't that way. Zach Alley knows exactly what is wanted, what's expected. And from what's told to me from the players, he has an ability, this phrase was told to me in broadcasting, but I think it bears true also in the coaching world, economy of words. Can you get your point across briefly, quickly, concisely, so that I can digest it, I can comprehend it, and I can execute it? Sometimes when you get long-winded and you start talking and things get really out there, it gets lost. I've been told Zach Alley has a great ability to be very concise and very matter of fact and explain exactly what he wants in a very succinct way to where it's easily digestible for players to then be able to take that and go execute on the field. I think that's very important. And I think like simple things. I talked about this when we did the spring game with Toby Rowland. Simple things that we all take for granted. Scout team, making cards, okay? There's a lot that goes into a practice. And when you make 30 cards, call it 30 cards for a practice, and you're making up, cards that you want the scout team to run because it's what you're expecting that week from an opposing team. Well, if the head coach has to look over every single card and then rewrite cards, that's not efficient. Now it's understood, like understanding exactly what an offense is going to do and how you're going to adjust to it and what call you want to be made. And for the head coach to know and not even have to worry about, I need to overlook this. I need to, make sure this is right, because he knows, he trained the defensive coordinator in Zach Alley exactly what they're going to get. Now you become more efficient as a defense. You become more efficient as a head coach. You become more efficient as a football team. And what I've been really impressed with is Coach Venable's ability to delegate and give a lot of responsibilities to Zach Alley and trust and know he's going to do it exactly the way I want it done. And I don't even have to worry about that. I can now utilize my time somewhere else because that's just not a situation that I have to deal with. And someone that can check you. Like, I don't know the dynamic between Coach Roof and Coach Venables on the headset in game and exactly what that was. But I do think that Coach Alley, even Coach Hall, with the background he has with Coach Venables, there are people on staff that have the respect of the head coach and defensive mind of this football team that can check him and say, wait a minute. I think we should take another look at this and do it this way. And I think that there is that respect between those coaches now that, maybe wasn't there previously. And I think it makes them overall just a better functioning unit.
So you brought up Coach Hall and that whole deal. I think when we were talking about BV and his career, I think Coach Hall aligns with that because he was an understudy at BV for years and then went on and did his own thing at Auburn and then obviously at Jacksonville State and then at Troy. So I think it's interesting how all they've all kind of collided back in Norman together. But real quickly.
By the way, real quick, I just want to say my senior year, when I was only, I think I was taking my last year, I was 6 or 9 hours, whatever it was. I had a lot of free time on my hands. I can't tell you how much time I spent with Coach Hall when he was still a GA, like his 8th, 9th year. I used to just come in and we'd watch cut up after cut up after cut up. I love that dude. I don't know if Sooner fans recognize or realize just how good he is.
Mm-hmm.
But he fortunate to have him as a safeties coach and a secondary coach because he is right up there with some of the best defensive minds in all college football. And it won't surprise me if sooner rather than later people recognize that and are trying to take shots at him and come get him. But B Hall and I go way. How about this for a good story? My recruiting visit. So my initial recruiting visit was canceled because there was an ice storm and they shifted and changed our flight. And we came in on a Saturday instead of a Friday. This is way back. This is circa December of 2000. And we came in on a Saturday. I was with Brett Rail, who's one of the top defensive ends in the country. Dante Hickson, who at the time was one of the top running backs in the country. And there was another kid from Dallas. And we got picked up on like one of those single engine Cessnas that was actually, I want to say the pilot was getting hours. It was like a student pilot. And I'll never forget, we're standing there on the tarmac in Dallas. And one of the recruits' families, we got in a big circle and they were praying for us just to make it. And whenever we go, we're on our flight and it was an awful flight and it was just unbearable. But we make it. And whenever we go to come down, we overshoot the runway. I'm not kidding you. Like, you can't even make this stuff up. We overshoot the runway. So we have to go up, fly back around, come back down. And there was like ice on the outskirts of the runway. And whenever we finally came down, we stopped right at the end of the runway. And the first face that I saw when I stepped foot on Oklahoma soil was Brandon Hall. He was there in the SUV to pick us up, and him and I still joke about it to this day. We were just thankful that that plane landed and did not crash, because that first go at it, whenever we missed the runway, I had a bad feeling that something good was not going to happen. But B Hall was that smiling face that I saw for the first time when I stepped foot on Oklahoma soil.
And knowing him, he probably had a smart ass thing to say the second you sat in the car too.
Still does to this day.
Yeah, no, oh yes,
no doubt.
Oh yes. All right. So flip to the offense, because you were at the spring game, obviously, and everybody's going to want to know your thoughts on Jackson Arnold. They're going to want to know your thoughts on the offense as a whole. Obviously, that offensive line needs work, but there was a lot of injuries. Like Garen Hatchett wasn't there, Troy Everett wasn't there. Obviously, Bronson Hickman wasn't available. So there's pieces that they're going to put there. They're obviously going to move Jake Sexton back to left tackle at some point, which is exactly where he should be. How do you see this offense playing out during the season? And are you as worried about it as everybody else is?
No, I'm not, because, and in Bill, I trust.
Yeah.
Bill Bedenbaugh is one of, if not the best offensive line coach in the country. So he took some hits last year, right? I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Your center probably should have come back. I think in retrospect, he stepped out a year early. You just had a first round offensive tackle, another drafted offensive tackle, coming in from Stanford was going to be a 1 year, essentially 1 year player, and he was going to go. I don't think you expected, your guard to go to Missouri and leave after a stellar freshman season. So when you lose 4 starters, that's tough for anybody. I don't care who you are across college football. You lose 4 starters up front, that's going to be tough to rebuild. So I get, and I think that's rightfully so, to look at the offensive line as an area of concern. But I always go back to, in Bill, I trust. And I think that, bringing in the SMU transfer, who's got a ton of starts, 36 starts, ton of snaps played, I think that's key, just to have a veteran presence there. I think you get Troy back probably somewhere there in fall camp, and by probably mid-season, call it Texas week, he's going to be back, reacclimated. He's going to give you good depth on the interior of that offensive line. I agree with you. Jacob Sexton, to me, he's a tackle. He's not a guard. And I think that, bringing in a guy like Fabechi is huge, and he is nasty. He is physical. He's going to move people off the football. I'm intrigued with what Garen Hatchett brings. I don't know, I'm going to have to see that before I can give a real declaration on who he is and what he's going to be. I would like to see a little more from Spencer Brown. I'm intrigued to see what he does this summer as we head into fall camp. But and maybe it's naive of me, in Bill, I trust. Bill's going to get that offensive line right. Are they going to be dominant? I did the LSU spring game. LSU's O-line is really good. They got 4 starters back. Emory Jones, Will Campbell, those 2 tackles, they are dudes. I mean, they are absolute dudes. Do I think Oklahoma's O-line is going to be LSU's O-line? I don't. But I do think, especially throughout the course of the season, they're going to round into shape. The other part that I really like, and I don't know if people understand or recognize, the continuity with Seth Littrell and Bill Bedenbaugh. They go back to Texas Tech. They were at Arizona together. Seth's sister is married to Bill's wife's brother. They are family. And I think that the continuity they're going to have in the run game in particular is going to be a real key. They see things out of the exact same lens, much like we talked about Zach Alley and Brent Venables earlier. And that's one thing that, we can talk about Jackson Arnold and Deion Burks. And I think the receiver core it's as deep a receiver room as I can remember. I'll put it on you guys to tell me the last time the receiver core looked as good as it looks going into the season. I don't remember the last time. I feel like the last 5-7 years, every year it's like, oh, who are they going to have a receiver? What's going to happen to a receiver? They got a legit. Emmett Jones has done a phenomenal
2019.
job. 19?
2019.
Better than
I'd
19.
have to. I don't even know. I mean, I'm not exactly sure who's on that roster.
CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, CeeDee
CeeDee
Lamb. Charleston Rambo. Who else was on that? Marvin Mitt. No, Marvin
No,
Mims
that was
the next
before
year. No, that
Mims.
was it. Who was the other one?
Yeah, that was the CD and Rambo year. Those were the two
Yeah.
guys for OU in the
Yeah.
passing game.
Was Dede on that team too, or was he gone by then?
He was gone.
Dede
He was gone in
15,
20,
16.
Yes,
Okay.
15, 16.
So, but it's the receiver room is really good, and I think Jackson is a star in the making. But if this offense is going to hum, what's going to make this offense really good and legit, and help make Oklahoma a contender in the SEC is run the football. And just listen to Seth and Joe John Finley. I love both those guys to death. And they are committed and dedicated to run the football. Like, don't get it twisted. This is an offense that wants to line up, move people off the ball, and run it down your throat. That's what they want to do. And that's what they are going to be committed to doing. And the fact that you've got your offensive line coach who's going to scheme it up in lockstep with your offensive coordinators, I think is a real key. And I think it's going to potentially give them the opportunity to have success. But early on in the season, do I think that offensive line is concerned? Yes. I think that you'd be naive not to acknowledge that fact, just from the standpoint of the youth, the inexperience. But as I said earlier, and Bill, I trust, I do think that like the last 6 games will look completely different potentially than the first 4 games for this Oklahoma Sooner team up front. And one name you didn't mention, I can't wait to see Taylor Tatum. And you guys know I'm not a recruiting guy. Like, I'll just be completely honest. I tell you this all the time, Brandon, is you and I get a chance to talk all the time when we're around our boys watching 7-on-7 football. I trust what coaches tell me. I trust what, people in the industry tell me as far as recruiting. I typically reserve my right to see people on the field, but from what I'm told from coaches and everybody in the industry, Taylor Tatum is a special cat. And I really do believe that he is going to factor into this rotation for the Oklahoma Sooners at running back. And I think Gavin Sawchuk is going to pick up right where he left off. Was it 5 straight 100-yard games to close out last season? And I think that there's good enough depth, but Taylor Tatum is that wild card to me that from an explosiveness, catching the football out of the backfield, that I can't wait to see what element he brings, because if he is as advertised, I think he's got a chance to be a pretty special running back for the Sooners.
And the comparison I've always made with Taylor Tatum is, to me, he's Kennedy Brooks with a lot more burst. And the one thing that stands out to me about Tatum that obviously stood out about Brooks when he was at Oklahoma is that yardage just came easy. It felt like the comment that we always made about Kennedy Brooks when he was here was that he has an uncanny ability to make 8 yards look like 4. And it's kind of the same deal with Taylor Tatum. But Kennedy Brooks also wasn't a guy that was going to run away from anybody. Typically, Taylor Tatum has that dimension to his game. So there's a very good reason, many good reasons why he was the number 1 running back in that recruiting class, and somebody that very feasibly could have a role from the jump. How much of a role, I don't know, but certainly could have a role as a true freshman at Oklahoma. Now, as we look ahead to the 2024 season, Dusty, this is one thing I'd be curious to get your take on. Toughest road trip right now, because you got to go to Missouri, you got to go to LSU, you got to go to Ole Miss, you get Alabama at home, you get Tennessee at home. I also don't think like Auburn has brought in some reinforcements. Can't disregard that road trip either. Which SEC road game do you think presents the most potential pitfalls for Oklahoma?
Oxford. And I did the LSU spring game. I think Baton Rouge is going to be a bear. I think that last game of the season is going to be very tough. But Oxford, I think Lane has pushed his chips in, and they're all in this season. Jackson Dart is a problem as a runner and as a thrower, and what I really appreciate is what they did defensively. You touched on Walter Nolan earlier beginning of this pod, he is a dog and he is a problem. And they've got legit guys on that side of the ball. So not only does Lane have an offense that's going to be humming, they've got a defense that's probably going to be as good a defense as Lane's had since he's been a head coach. So I look at them and 10 wins, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 11 wins last year, best season in program history. They've got a lot of momentum and they've got a lot of guys coming back. I know that you lose Quinshon Judkins to Columbus, but you bring back Parrish comes back from Miami. He's going to be there. Like, they're going to be really, really good. I think that if I had to rank it, and I think LSU, Garrett Nussmeier he's a dude now. I mean, just get ready. Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a problem for everybody in college football next season. Kyron Lacey can get open. LSU is not going to take some big step back, even with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas going to the NFL in the first round. They're still going to be really good. I like Blake Baker coming in there as a defensive coordinator. I personnel wise, I think they're probably a year away. Whereas I think from a personnel standpoint, from everything that's going on in Oxford, Mississippi, if you're asking me to rank it heading into next season, I think that's probably the most daunting task. Acknowledging that from a stadium and venue standpoint, there's no tougher task than what you're going to see there in Death Valley at the end of the season. But if I was going to do a power ranking, it's close, but I would say Oxford, Mississippi, that's going to be as challenging an opponent as Oklahoma has heading into next season on the road.
All right. So outside of maybe a surprise or two over the next few days, because the portal ended on Tuesday for undergrads, on Wednesday for grad transfers, which means today and tomorrow will be the days that they just had to have their paperwork in by then. So they have 48, 72 hours the universities do to get their names in. So if there's not a surprise, we know what OU's roster looks like right now. We know what they're heading in to the 2024 season with. It's a formidable roster. And I watched some people even last night, one of your colleagues, Greg McElroy, said it's going to be tough for OU to get to 8 wins. Even this was like 17 hours ago at that point. So this was like at 1 a.m. So at some point, this was before the Damonic Williams commitment, but at the same time, that's the only piece that changed for OU. But it's a big piece. I get it. Big piece. What is your take on OU's potential record in 2024? Last question from me.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's May 3rd. So these opinions can change. I mean, it's not like it's, and I know Greg and I, obviously colleagues, he's a friend of mine. He's not going out on a limb. I mean, Vegas set the number at 7.5.
That's what he was doing, was over unders, and he thinks it's going to be hard to get to 8. Yeah.
I mean, and it is like, if 8 wins for that schedule, that's a good football team. I think Oklahoma,
which he said,
I expect, this is just my expectation. I expect Oklahoma to win 9 games. And I understand what that means. That means that, if you take a collection of at Ole Miss, at LSU, Alabama and Norman, Texas and Dallas, you need to win, more than likely, you need to win 2 of those 4 games. And that is tough. That ain't easy. But I think that this team and where they're at as a program, that's my expectation. I expect Oklahoma to be a 9-win team next year. And if you're 9-3, if you're 8-4, it's a good year. Anything over that, I think it's a great year. Like, to me, that's the barometer. Is 8-4 is a good season, and you feel good about the trajectory Oklahoma football's in, and you step into the SEC with that bear of a schedule, and you're like, okay, we feel good. If you hit 9 wins, which I think this team is capable of, then I think you're like, that's a hell of a year. That's a big time season for Oklahoma. So, I mean, the other thing too, just Oklahoma fans, and I think SEC fans of a lot of these top tier teams are going to have to come to grips with, like, 9-3, even 8-4 is like 11-1 and 10-2 in previous years. It's just the truth. That's a hard reality to be in because you're just so used to 10 wins in the regular season as a standard. And I don't think that's going to change within those walls. But I think as fans and just people that cover college football, we're going to have to get used to 9-3 are teams that are really, really good. It's just that the schedules are so daunting that losses are going to happen. And I know that that's been, for the history of college football, losses are just unfathomable. Right? We can't even imagine. Oh my gosh, you got to be undefeated or you got to be 11-1. There's going to be teams that are 9-3 that you look at and you go, they can compete for a national championship. That's just going to be a new, tough to understand reality that I think Oklahoma fans are going to have to, come to grips with here over these next couple of years as they integrate to the SEC.
There's a parallel.
Is that a playoff? Just real quick, is that playoff 9-3? Is that playoff?
It's fringe. I think it's fringe. It's right there on the cusp. And to me, like if you're 10-2 in the SEC, you're getting in. Period. You're getting in. Yep. 9-3, I think, is going to be interesting depending on what other conferences do. Big 10, Big 12, ACC. But 9-3, you're in the conversation. 10-2, and you're undoubtedly in. Which in previous years, 10-2 is looked at as a bad year. Now 10-2 is going to be looked at as a heck of a year, and no doubt about it, you got a chance to achieve all your goals.
There's a parallel there just as far as reshaping expectations. The conversation that we were having earlier about defense at Oklahoma, 2011, the number 32 defense in the country seems like an aberration of the wrong variety, but a decade later, boy, would you kill to have the 32nd ranked defense in the country. Been a fantastic conversation, Dusty. The last thing I want to ask you, kind of piggybacking off that question about the season ahead, is that obviously to a certain extent, every program in college football goes as their quarterback goes. You have to have strong quarterback play in order to win football games. So I'm going to take Jackson Arnold out of the equation, but other than the QB position, who in your mind is the X factor for this football team, the player that can substantially impact Oklahoma's ceiling based on their performance in 2024?
It's a great question, Parker. I haven't had that question thrown at me to this point. I'm a line of scrimmage guy, man. I think it's the offensive line. I think it's Damonic Williams. I think it's the SEC is a line of scrimmage league. And if you can't win up front, you can't win. And at the end of the day, Oklahoma is their record and how they do in this year and the years moving forward is going to be dictated by how good they are up front. And so I think that just the collective offensive line, that to me is one of the X factors. And I mean, look, Oklahoma went deep into their pockets. They pulled out all the stops to bring in Damonic Williams, and they brought him in for a reason. He's got to be that anchor. He's got to be that linchpin and the interior defense that makes life just very difficult on opposing offenses. I can't stress to you enough. Inside zone is one of the number one runs in all of college football. And when you can have that guy, whether they're in an Okie front, they're in their even front, whatever it may be, that can eat up the interior of that defensive line, command two. And when they want to single block you, boy, your life's going to be a living hell. That is so key and so important. And I know we talked about edge and obviously corners are important. And I think they've got a great nickel in Kendall Dobie who got a chance to, that cheetah position just really have a big time season. The safeties are great, but it all starts up front, man. And if the offensive line can round into shape and Damonic Williams can be that force in the middle, Oklahoma's going to give themselves a great opportunity to make some noise year one in the SEC.
All right, Dusty, really appreciate you. I have to do one final thing because you said something just a second ago about they went deep into their pockets. There's a narrative nationally that Oklahoma is now broke and they will not be able to play the NIL game because they threw so much at Damonic Williams. you probably know more than anybody else. Is OU broke now, and will they not be able to land recruits because of their NIL all going to Dominic Williams, which is a false statement, but I'll let you.
Look, I don't have their financial ledger.
Yeah, I
But
know.
I think Oklahoma, obviously, boosters, big time donors matter. I think the fan bases matter, and Oklahoma, I think, is in a good position. They've been very smart with the way they've spent, and I think that they're still in great shape to move forward. So I give Bart Shelley a ton of credit, with the Crimson and Cream and the collective that they have. I think Curtis Lofton and the staff there at OU have done a really good job being smart about who they're going to spend their money on and exactly what type of player they're bringing in. And I have the utmost confidence that they position themselves, even with this big acquisition of Dominic Williams, to continue to be diligent, be smart, and be able to still bring in good players. So I'm not worried in the least that Oklahoma is overspent or they've gone broke. But I mean, that's an issue for everybody, right? I mean, not just Oklahoma. I mean, I think everybody worries, at what point do you bleed these collectives dry and you keep going back to the table and you keep wondering, which is why we could do a whole nother podcast on what this thing looks like 2 years from now. I mean, I was talking on my morning show on SiriusXM with Cannell yesterday and really this entire week about future of college football. And, we're reading a blurb from the director of the bowls. And he's talking about how, they expect in the upcoming years, this to all move in-house and the athletic departments directly to be signing these players to contracts and move a little bit away from collectives. Again, that's a whole nother conversation, a deeper dive that we can potentially do another time. But I think that Oklahoma's positioned in really good shape. They made a statement with going to get Dominic Williams. I think they'll continue to move in that fashion. I just think it's interesting because 2 years from now, how players are paid, the contracts that are being put in front of them, and what this entire landscape looks like could be vastly different than the one we're talking about right now.
Dusty, I appreciate you. You brought knowledge that has been not seen on this podcast because of our lack of it in certain aspects, but you have, informed us and informed our viewership in a lot of areas when it comes to Dominic Williams, OU's roster, obviously some very cool stories from back in the day, and we greatly appreciate you coming on this podcast.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you guys for having me, and it's going to be a fun summer, and I can't wait for the fall. The move to the SEC, it's going to be electric. It's going to be fire. I cannot wait for next season. Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC, a 12-team playoff. I mean, as a college football fan and an analyst who covers the sport, I mean, what more could we ask for, man? It's going to be I am as jacked and excited about the upcoming season as any season I can remember since I've been doing this. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, sir. And I will see you later on this afternoon, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely, boys.
Once again, we want to thank Dusty Dvoracek, former OU All-American, former Chicago Bear, ESPN announcer, SiriusXM every morning at 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. With Danny Cannell for joining us today on this podcast to talk about Dominic Williams. What a informative conversation that was across the board with the OU roster, NIL, Dominic Williams, the future of OU, even some past stories. So thank him once again. If you're not a member of OU Insider, you can go over there to ouinsider.com. You can sign up because we've got a ton of information, whether it's recruiting, whether it's transfer portal stuff, whether it's the transfer portal in basketball right now. Brody just dropped some bombs last night. And this morning, we're recording it on a Friday. So Thursday night, Friday morning, ton of information. OU is making waves with potentially the number one hoops transfer right now. And if that happens, I may have to retract some of my Porter Moser hate. But It is what it is. Go join us, $9.95 or $99.95 for a whole year, $9.95 for 1 month. Give us a try. Lots going on. Official visits, evaluations, all of that going on at Oklahoma right now as far as football goes. Subscribe to this channel, YouTube channel right here. Right here, OU Insider YouTube channel. We got some crazy new podcasts coming for you guys here that you guys are going to love. People you are already aware of could potentially be under our umbrella soon. Some big names. So make sure you're subscribed for that and everything as far as football, basketball, baseball, softball, recruiting, transfer portal. We have all of it also right here for you on this channel. All right, for Parker Thune, my name is Brandon Drum. We once again want to thank Dusty Dvoracek, but that's going to do it for this version of the OU Insider Under the Visor Sooners podcast. You guys have a blessed day.